Chapter 52. Afterwards. I'd been right. Something had happened after all. Something bad. I'd never known I could be so upset about being right. Mother reached for my hand. Her fingers were trembling. Everyone was silent. After a minute or two, the smell of smoke wafted out of the back door. Betty Jean glanced over at Pastor George. "Stay here," he ordered, and he went back into the house. Curtis moved to follow him, but Betty Jean grabbed his arm. "You heard your father." The next-door neighbor poked her head out a window. "You all right?" "I think so. Betty Jean choked up and couldn't finish. Liz shook her head. "Marley, if you hadn't said something—" I glanced over at Liz. She was biting her lip, but I could see it quivering. Curtis put his arm around her. Pastor George came back again. "Someone threw a brick through our window. It landed on the couch. From the damage to the living room, there must have been a couple of sticks of dynamite, too." And like a picture in slow motion, I could imagine it. Red leaning out the window of his car, pitching a rock at us like he'd done with the eggs. The window shattering like the ice on a pond in spring and covering us all with little bits of glass. All of us standing frozen, shocked, glittering as the sun shone in the ruined window, not noticing the dynamite until it was too late. "We should call the police," said Mother. Betty Jane nodded, but she didn't move. I realized she was crying, great big tears that flowed down her cheeks without making a sound. Pastor George sat down on a stump in the backyard and covered his face with his hands. I imagined as a pastor he had experience giving bad news to people, but it must have been different when it was your own wife and son. I knew I should be scared too. We could all have been killed, but all I could think was, the dynamite is gone, Red doesn't have any more, and no one was hurt. The next-door neighbor came out again then. She was old and tiny, shorter than me, with white hair and a lined face. "I already notified the authorities," she said. "You just tell me who else you need me to call." Liz's family arrived first. Her mother wore a yellow dress which looked beautiful against her dark skin, though half of the dress was wrinkled and the other half was not, as if she'd been ironing when she got the call. Her father was light-skinned and movie-star handsome, like Montgomery Clift and Harry Belafonte rolled into one. I thought Liz might introduce me, but her father put his arm around her shoulders and her mother led her away, and only Tommy looked at me and glared. Daddy ran up then and threw his arms around Mother and me. "It was Red," I said. He nodded, and Mother started to cry. The old neighbor offered me a cup of coffee, and I took it. My hands were cold, even though it was a warm evening, and it felt good to hold the cup. I tried to take a sip, but only managed to spill half the coffee on the ground. A few minutes later, the police arrived. There were two of them, an older man who went off with Pastor George to look at the damage of the house, and a young man with a mustache who seemed more interested in talking to Mother and me. I told the policeman everything, about Liz and me running into each other at the zoo, and taking Red's keys, looking in his trunk, and— "Oh, Marley," Mother exclaimed. "It gets worse," I admitted. I told them about getting stuck in the trunk. My daddy sucked in his breath as I told them about the letter opener and forgetting the last 2 sticks and David coming to pick me up. And even though I knew I was going to get in trouble, I deserved to get in trouble, it still felt good to tell. Finally, I took a deep breath. Since I spent so much time in that car, I knew it when I saw it, and you know the rest. Silence again. The policeman gave me an odd look. "Say something," I pleaded. "I know I'm in trouble, but—" Mother began to laugh then, a nervous, hysterical laugh. The police officer glared at my mother. "You don't actually believe this nonsense, do you?" "What?" said Daddy. "It's ridiculous, stealing keys, climbing into a trunk. Who can believe a story like that?" "It's true," I said. "You ask Liz." "If you're lying, I'm sure the colored girl will too." "My daughter does not lie," said Daddy. "You're saying it was Red Dalton, the football star, right?" the police officer asked. I nodded. The policeman shook his head. "No way he'd pull a stupid stunt like this. But what I'd like to know," he said, "is why you were at this colored family's house." "What does that have to do with—" Daddy started. Mother put a hand on his arm. "We're just dropping off some flyers. There's an election tomorrow." "Was it some sort of integrationist meeting?" Mother shook her head. "And what if it was?" snapped Daddy. "Are you supposed to protect all of us? Aren't you supposed to protect all of us?" "All citizens of Little Rock," he agreed. "But if it was some commie meeting—" "My wife and 13-year-old daughter are not communist," said Daddy. "Where is Sergeant Pike?" Out of town, said the older officer, coming out of the house. You were lucky. If anyone had been sitting by that window. No one wanted to finish that sentence. Numbers flowed through my head. Prime numbers, timetables, pi to as many digits as I knew. But it didn't help. But the police didn't believe me. They weren't going to do anything. They were acting like Betty Jean should be grateful to only have a broken window and a burnt-up couch.